ask what's your sign, I mean what constellation was the sun in at the moment of your birth. The sun sign is important because it shows our basic character traits. Over the next few months, we'll cover the whole zodiac, but for now, let's talk about the sun in the sign of Scorpio. Its symbol is a scorpion. This body is more constricting than it looks. The scorpion's abdomen is fused all the way down to the tail. The thing that protects it also prevents it from being nimble, which you see in Scorpio's personality. This sign limits itself with its own defenses. On the scorpion, you find something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the zodiac, an offensive weapon, the venomous stinger. Every Scorpio has one. It usually manifests as a sharp tongue and the revenge impulse. Scorp needs time to understand and control the stinger, which generally happens at midlife. Prior to that, they use it on everyone they're close to. If you interact with Scorpio on a regular basis, you're probably going to get stung. Being a water sign, it's got a responsive feeling nature, and Scorpios can find themselves deeply hurt or betrayed by things that, let's say, a Gemini or an Aquarius would shrug off. One of the emotional defenses you see is that they erect a wall of pride around pain. Pride is the cause of the stiff coldness that comes off of an emotionally injured Scorpio. If it opens and lets someone in and gets hurt, it feels it has betrayed itself. The shell is the only thing keeping its soft guts from being damaged. So Scorp has high standards when it comes to self-protection. Now Scorpio is associated with the planet Pluto and its patron god of the dead, but prior to the discovery of our last planet in the 1930s, Scorpio was paired with Mars and its patron god of war. The gods of war and death. This tells something about Scorpio's nature. It's serious and it fights. It fights for survival. Scorpio is obsessed with life and death. It's born in a suit of armor. And that pride, its inability to lose, can make it self-destructive. This potential is reflected in how a scorpion reacts when it's backed into a corner. When there's no way out, the creature prefers to sting itself to death than to go down in flames by anyone else's hand. Scorpio doesn't usually take it to the point of suicide, but they have quiet ways of harming themselves, often through making decisions that lower quality of life. You can imagine that a sign ruled by war and death would have a difficult time apologizing. It lost the battle. It had to retreat. Isn't that bad enough? I've noticed that Scorpio will make it better by doing things for you rather than saying I'm sorry. Count it. Scorpio is naturally full of tension. That's why it's the sign associated with sexuality. The typical sex act is the building of tension and the release of tension through orgasm. Orgasm has been called le petit mort, the little death, because it causes us to leave our normal perceptions of the body behind and drop the ego as in death. Sex is meaningful to Scorpio, and they tend to be monogamous. You hardly ever see them at swingers parties. Leave that to the air signs. Scorp is cautious about who they let in. They need time to watch and make sure the other person is who they say they are. Scorp is associated with the word transformation, which can come from a spiritual practice you visit and revisit, or a grueling life experience. But their favorite way to transform is through a close, committed, intimate relationship. Scorp wants to merge with another person because that's when it gets juicy for them. That's when it's possible to leave the ego, to change from individuals into a third entity, a couple. This hinges on the making and keeping of promises and on being vulnerable. Vulnerability is death to a warrior and a Scorpion, so they must be able to trust their partner completely. One of the ways they learn to trust is by keeping track of the quantity of energy each is devoting to the relationship and finding equity there. They think of survival, don't forget. And they need to think of you as an asset, not a liability, or they won't be content for long. Make Scorpio feel safer than they feel alone, and there's a very real potential for them to use the relationship as an avenue for spiritual deaths and rebirths. They can see marriage as a place to give and receive sacred energy. And Scorp is more likely than any other sign to perceive an ancient mysticism in conjugal love. So they can feel isolated if a partner doesn't understand what it all means. The sun moves into Scorpio when the earth is growing cold. For millennia, you had to take a good look at your resources. The question in mind was, will I live or die? There was no more time for sowing seeds or reaping a harvest or salting fish in the sunshine. Whatever you had was all you had. Scorpios are born with an exceptional ability to take stock of their performance, their financial condition, their emotions, and their motives. Winter is always impending in the Scorpio psychology. This dynamic is illustrated further by the god Pluto. His realm is the underworld, where he has a difficult job, setting souls to rest, punishing them, or letting them flap in the wind for eternity. Like the other two water signs, Cancer and Pisces, Scorp has a pronounced emotional nature, but unlike the others, Scorpio saves its compassion for people who are helping themselves. Pluto never changes what he's going to do to a soul because someone gives him a sob story. In the underworld, laws are clear. People have created their fate by way of the life they've lived, and Pluto isn't inclined to bend the rules. All the water signs believe that behavior should have consequences, but Scorpio is the most unsympathetic toward anyone trying to avoid those consequences. Is this hard? Yes, even intolerant. But Pluto is also a dedicated husband. Unlike his brothers, who have many consorts and hundreds of children, Pluto is faithful. His life consists of work and his queen Persephone. This god lacks the gilded tongue that would sometimes help him avoid trouble, but he has a kindness that speaks to Scorpio's tendency to provide whatever they possibly can within their own limitations. Just as Pluto is god of the dead for all eternity, Scorpio's intensity is permanent. It's complex, and when doubtful, becomes mysterious and begins to withdraw the cues that would tell someone else what the Scorpio is thinking and feeling. It's usually not conscious. The Scorpion just begins feeling that the exoskeleton isn't quite cutting it. They're very tuned into power, and they think the less you know, the less power you have. It's nothing personal, it's primal. And speaking of primal things, that stinger has other functions besides being a weapon. It seduces, it probes, it prods, and it penetrates. Nobody interrogates or investigates like Scorp. And they like plumbing a subject because they're changed by anything they examine in depth. The eighth sign loves a mystery, but they must solve their own mystery. the riddle of the self to have true power. You often find them in the psychotherapeutic arts, not just because of the transformation it involves, but because they like gaining intimate knowledge of others while revealing nothing about themselves. They know that crawling through the worst pain can lead to the most satisfying rebirth. I've watched Scorpio go to the highest mountaintop to release themselves from their inner darkness. Scorpio is the most desirous sign, and because it can get dark in that inward brooding mind, this sign must be careful about developing an inner Hydra. The Hydra is a creature that looks like a serpent and has 9 snake heads. When Hercules sliced one off, 3 bigger ones grew in their place. A Scorpio who tries to kill their desires or to cut them down through sheer force of the blade is going to make matters worse. Denying desires inflames them and causes an inner tension that Scorp doesn't need. They're already in a lifelong struggle to reduce tension. What makes this complicated sign happy is a life in which they have the space to molt, to constantly create a new and improved version of themselves. If you have a Scorpio, don't take them for granted and tell them you like them for who they are. Tough as they can be, they'd rather be liked than respected. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk. The Personality Profiles, Scorpio. I'm Joy. More videos to come.